Last night I spent some time living with my painting, and it's a very important step when you get close to being finished, which I think this painting is pretty close to finished, to try to separate yourself from the painting a little bit so that you can better judge the overall effectiveness of your treatment of the subject. And I came to a couple of conclusions. I think, in general, I like what I've done. I still need to develop some of the details in the bird itself and the perch. But in a macro sense, I've come to the conclusion that while I like what I did in the background, I think I'd like to darken the top and create a graded wash down maybe halfway or 2/3 of the way of the painting, and I think I'd also like to darken the perch a little bit. So I'm going to work on that. I'm going to start out with my 1-inch wash brush, and I think I'm going to use some violet. I don't have much on my palette. I think this is Da Vinci Violet. I use a combination of Da Vinci paints and Winsor Newton paints. Winsor Newton has been the standard for watercolorists for a very long time, and it's a really good line of materials, paints, brushes, pretty much everything having to do with watercolors. But they've gotten a little expensive, some colors in particular. They do have a really wide selection of colors available. But I mentioned the other day about the Gordon MacKenzie book, The Watercolorist Essential Notebook. And one of the things that he did in that book was to compare the major brands of watercolors. And from his comparison, I discovered that Da Vinci really stacks up well against Winsor Newton as a whole. And the paints are quite a bit less expensive. They don't have the extensive selection of colors, but they do have a pretty extensive selection. Okay, so I started out with a brush loaded with Da Vinci Violet at the top, and I did overlapping strokes to carry the paint down the painting. And now I'm working with pretty much just clear water. It's not really clear. It's from the dirty side of my reservoir, but it's doesn't really have paint in it. And I'm carefully cutting around my subject where I'm painting. It's a fairly easy job, because my subject is mostly fairly straight lines. All right, I like that. It's subtle, but it does cool the background, which pushes it back, and there's a nice gradation. It's maybe a little abrupt where it ends on this side, so using my thirsty brush, I'll push this up a little bit. That's better. And I'm going to let that dry before I decide whether that's enough or not. I may want to darken the upper part of the painting a little bit more, but it's a little too early to decide that, and if I go back in and try to darken it right now, it's only going to make the swelling of the paper and the tendency for the paint to flow into the valleys more of a problem. So I'm going to leave it alone, and I'm going to come down to my perch, and I'm using a round now, and I'm going to use my burnt sienna ultramarine blue mix. This is the browner mix as opposed to the bluer mix, which is right there. And I'm using, I think this is my number 7 brush, pretty good sized brush, and I'm mixing up a nice liquid pool in the well. A lot of watercolor painters prefer the paint right out of the tube. I'm kind of the exception. I prefer my paint dry to the palette and reactivated. The reason is that if I use paint right out of the tube, invariably I will end up with a streak of undiluted paint where I don't want it. Whereas if I have my paint dried on my palette and reactivated, it's much easier to avoid the undiluted passages. I still often have passages that are darker than I really want them to be, but I can always float some more water in. The worst thing about using paint that's dry to the palette is that frequently I will there will be chunks of paint. I actually had a couple up here in this corner that I picked up in the well and carried to my painting. But I can usually just kind of sweep them off to the side, which is what I did in this case here. And oftentimes I can get them to behave better, to be liquefied by the water that I'm using. I use quite a bit of water. You probably have noticed that. A lot of painters are a little aghast at the amount of water that I use, but one of the things that I love about my palette especially, I use a lot of earth colors, and as I've mentioned before, earth colors have the ability to create a granular effect where the solids that are in suspension separate out and clump together. And I really like that about earth colors. And in order to make that happen, you don't have a lot of control over it. All you can do is set up the conditions to allow it to happen, and then stand back and get out of the way. But it will only work if you use enough water to lubricate the process, to allow the solids to number one, separate out, and number two, move around so that they can clump together. So I do use quite a lot of water. So there I've darkened up my perch quite a bit. I've left the white of the paper in a few places, which I may choose to do another glaze over. And I use that term glaze intentionally. It's what I've just done is glazed over a light wash on top of the work that I did previously. And because I used a fair amount of water and I worked fairly quickly without a lot of brush work, it mostly leaves what was already there unchanged and just adds another layer on top of it, which you can see through to see the work that I did previously. So I do this glazing quite a lot, and I probably will do more of it because I've darkened up much of the perch, the white of the paper is really a little bit too contrasty with the darker values around them. So I probably will want to tone them down a little bit. But for now, in order to keep the range of values, I'm going to leave it alone and let it dry, and then I'll come back to it. So I think I've done all I can for now. I've got a lot of wet areas on my paper. Almost the whole painting is wet now. The only exception is the bird and the bottom of the background and the white passages on the perch. So this is a really good time to call it a session and walk away from it and let it dry. I'll be back. Thanks for watching.